creating curiosity by asking better questions. This is Shed Talk. Anne-Marie Lurie, Chief Economist for CREB. Oh, wow. This is going to be a great interview. Anne-Marie Lurie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much for joining me on Shed Talk.
Thanks for having me.
So you have been on how many podcasts, would you say?
I'd say at least half a dozen.
Half a dozen. And public speaking is probably your biggest thing you do?
Yes, I do a lot of presentations to a wide range of audiences. So,
Ooh, like how big?
I have spoken to crowds as small as 20 and as large as 1,000. So,
Wow. So as being a chief economist, what's the biggest thrill that you get out of this?
I like speaking to people. So I really do enjoy going out, speaking to different crowds, and then actually always getting their feedback. So one of the things I love to do is, like, I know the things that I work on, but I like to hear those inside stories from other people. So, people often come up to me after and tell me things that they might see in their industry, or a lot of some detailed information that way. That is just a different flavor than what you would get outside of the numbers. So as much as I love staring at numbers all day, which I do, part of the enjoyment of the job is going and meeting a wide range of people from various different industries, which always gives different perspectives.
So when you're doing as being the chief economist with CREB, like I look at that and like you said, you love numbers and you love meeting people. That's like an oxymoron. Like how can you love numbers and meeting people? It just seems so unique.
Depends on how much time I spend doing numbers versus people's. I would say 80% of my time I'm really working with numbers, which I absolutely love. And I'm good with that. And that 20% kind of gives me enough, but not overwhelming.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So when you're doing your numbers, and let's talk about CREB, and then you're obviously in it, what is the greatest fascination with the numbers that you're looking for? Like, what are you drilling down to get?
Depends on what there's really a couple levels. First level is I'm always trying to figure out, well, what's driving the market? What's happening? And looking at one indicator support what's happening. So when I'm looking at numbers, I'm looking at it from the perspective, does this meet with the story? Does this make sense? What supports my theories, right? So that's like the first sort of aspect of, does this fit with the overall economy? Because I specialize in housing, what do those housing numbers look like? Does it flow with the rest of the story? And I think that's kind of my first basis. And then I always look for the other stuff, the unique stuff, like what's different, what has changed, or what story am I getting out of the numbers? And oftentimes I look for different indicators to see, are they all saying the same thing? Or is there anything doing something a little different?
So what would the story indicate to you with Calgary? Hey, take a minute and smash that subscribe button, and let's get back to the episode.
Well, Calgary's been in a very different scenario, so especially when you compare it to other larger cities. So right now we're in a situation where we just have no supply. Supply levels are extremely low. We haven't seen, especially in the detached, like this is the lowest we've ever seen on record. And, the record was really set quite low back in 2006, and that was pre-financial crisis. So we're in a different scenario today, and it's really odd because you wouldn't expect that with the high interest rate environment. Typically, when interest rates are high, you see slower sales activity. Now, we have to a certain extent seen slower sales, and the numbers are telling us that, but they have been exceptionally strong given the high interest rates. And I think a lot of that is to do with the migration that we're seeing into the province. So I think that when we look at Calgary, that's what some of the differences are. Like some of the other markets in the country are slowing. They have way more supply than they have the demand. They're seeing the typical impact you would expect with high interest rate environment, but they're also not seeing the same flows of interprovincial migration that Alberta is. So that's what's the main difference between our province and some of the other provinces. And this is just something that I like to look at all the time. So that's just some of those comparisons. Our prices keep rising. So another difference, while you're seeing some prices really softening in some of the markets, Calgary's hit new record highs. And that's not only unique to Calgary, we haven't even seen that in the rest of the province. So, I do work with CREB and I work with Calgary, but I also take care of all of Alberta. I take care of Saskatchewan, and I take care of a few markets in Ontario. So when I'm doing those comparisons, going, well, what's Calgary is different. Calgary really is outperforming a lot of the other parts of the province, as well as, other larger cities in the country.
And why would Calgary outperform?
I think a lot of it is to do with migration. So we're continuing to see migration into the province. A higher share, I believe, are coming to Calgary. And there's opportunity here. So, I mean, people have to ask me, why Calgary versus Edmonton? I'm like, well, there's obviously a lot of other factors that drive people to come to our city because of that interprovincial that's coming in. We think part of that, is driven to Calgary because of our lifestyle, because of airport, access to, better flights than, let's say, Edmonton. And I mean, of course, our province is generally doing well. Our economy is outperforming a lot of other parts of the country. So that helps bring people here because we have jobs. Also, our relative affordability. Things to kind of keep in mind with, even though we're less than, and we're higher than Edmonton and Calgary. But when you put perspective on it, a detached home in Calgary, even though prices have increased and we're sitting at around 600,000 for a typical home, pushing up closer, well, it's been pushing up higher than that. We're actually almost at 700 now for a detached home. Let's compare that to Toronto, where that detached home might be 1.7 million. So that's another fact that really pulls people here. So I think when we think about the affordability prospect in Alberta, the fact that we continue to see some fairly strong economic activity, all of that combined really has attracted people to our city. And it's a fairly livable city. There's other factors that play into why Calgary versus, let's say, other parts of the province. You can't deny we're in close proximity to the mountains. We have a lot of those other opportunities as well.
So how does the labor, so we talk about labor shortage and we're going to talk about, and just ask the question, because we got labor shortage, we got housing, and I don't know do I use the word crisis?
Crisis to me it's a bit extreme.
It is an extreme. It's one of those things. Okay, which side do you want? The left side or the right side? It's extreme. Here's what it is, because of the news. If you're seeing it in the news, it's already too late. This is where we're already at, and this is what's going on. It's not a crisis.
It's never too. We have land. It's very different. So park that. It's about how long it takes to get housing built. That's a different story. But we are not we have land availability. We're not in a land shortage situation. Now, how long it takes for that land to get developed and brought on to get new units on, different story. And oftentimes when they're talking about housing crisis, they're also talking about affordable housing. And it's not always on affordable ownership. Some of that's to do with affordable rentals. So whenever I see those types of headlines, I go, hang on, what does that mean? Let's break it out by, is it ownership? Is it rental? What are we talking about, what we're really lacking? And I think the challenge in our market is properties available in the lower end of the market in terms of ownership. There isn't a lot of lower priced detached homes anymore, at least in the city. But the difference is, and of course, higher costs. So as you mentioned, labor is a challenge. That hasn't changed. Immigration should help, right? That technically, if you're immigrating people who could fill those positions, that should help limit some of those challenges in terms of labor shortages. I think we're seeing a bit of that, not necessarily enough to alleviate all the problems. People in the construction industry know far more on that side of things. And I think that is a challenge that continues to play out. But when you're talking about housing, you have to remember that where Alberta is different is we can add supply. If you have the labor there and, municipalities allow it, that's also sometimes a challenge, understanding what those municipal regulations are and how long does it take to get that land ready to be developed. And sometimes we go through blips, right? So we've seen it in Calgary where you have periods where we don't have enough activity. You see the new home industry respond. And then it depends on what happens from there, right? So we have had periods where we've had too much supply. We just have to look back to 2015 on to 2019, where we had far more supply than the demand at the time, and our prices were generally slow, falling to flat. So I think that's always got to be perspective when you think about what happens in our province and in our city.
So when you're looking at 2015, when everything was pretty stable, what was the average house price back then to now?
Well, back then it was probably, depending on detached home, under 500. So some perspective, it was in the 400 range, the typical detached home. So now we're much higher. Obviously, we're closer to 7. Now, much of those gains, though, came over the past couple of years. So one thing I did do is I looked at, okay, we know 2014 was our previous high. We went through COVID. COVID did a whole lot of different things to the market. So ignore that for a second. It took a lot of supply up. And I mean, this is at a time when our economy wasn't doing as well. So we went into COVID with way too much supply. So we didn't see price gains happen till a little later, whereas markets like Toronto and Vancouver, they already had no supply prior to COVID. So they had a much stronger ramp up in prices than we did. Now, after COVID, our economy started getting better, right? We started to see some job growth. We didn't see the same sort of challenges that we had back in 2015. Oil prices were much higher. Fundamentally, whatever diversification that we've had happen, the energy sector still is really important to this province. That's not going to change anytime soon. And that was some of the differences. So home prices basically stayed flat through that entire period. COVID hit, they started to increase. So we saw 2019, and they started to improve a bit. They didn't recover from their 2014 highs until 2020. Apartment condos just recovered this year. So you have to put some perspective with the recent growth. And that's why, again, I caution over the housing crisis, because it's like, we didn't have price growth for a very long time. So now we've seen gains 20% over the past 2 years, pretty significant gains, and people feel it. But we have to put some perspective over that longer time frame. It doesn't really look that bad. We've had a 20% gain since 2014. Toronto's at over 100%, right? Just for perspective.
So 100% gain out of Toronto.
Since 2014.
In 2014.
So their prices have doubled since 2014.
So we're talking at 400,000, okay, back in 2014.
That wasn't their price.
That was ours. So back then they would be like 800,000.
I'd have to check exactly.
I'm just going on talk, and then that would be double 1.6 million.
Yeah.
Is where that becomes, and there's that big jump.
Yeah.
And Vancouver, the same.
Very similar, not quite as high. Right. Toronto did see stronger gains as a city versus what we saw in Vancouver, but they still had, I think it was still 78% over that from 2014 to today. And why I say from 2014, because again, it gives you perspective that they didn't have that same economic challenge that we did over that time frame. And longer term theory says that housing should appreciate at at least at the rate of inflation, right? That's theory on housing. You should see appreciation every year in home values, at least at that rate of inflation. So when you take it over that longer time frame, we know there's periods you grow higher, faster than inflation, periods that you might have some downward adjustments, obviously related to economic conditions. But when you look at it over that longer time frame, I'm thinking, our growth isn't really that abnormal.
Interesting. So now that the government's actually stepping in right now to try to get new housing, to put in there, okay, let's get into low housing. How do you feel that's going to affect everything?
I think it depends on what the target is. So again, one of the challenges we're seeing right now is a lack of rental. And that's it's been driving a lot of rental values up, and it's why rental rates are much higher. Now, adding supply depends on the supply. If you're focusing that supply on affordable rental, define what affordable rental is, different issue, then that can help at least add that supply to the market. I'm more about removing barriers to add on to supply. But, if you're saying affordable ownership, well, that varies depending on location. And, again, what do you define as the affordable? So I'm always have a struggle bit with what is defined as affordable. Affordable rental versus affordable ownership, different things. Very difficult to come in, especially on detached. And again, this comes down to people's perceptions. What is affordable in, a detached market? We have a lot of product in the apartment condo sector that's in a lower price range. But people don't necessarily want that, right? So they say there's no affordable. And it's like, and they've been saying this for years. And I'm like, well, we did have a lot of product before that was in some pretty low price ranges, but it's not a detached home. So sometimes it's just understanding what exactly are they planning on building? Is it apartment style product, row, townhouse, what price range, who's building it? Because the costs have generally risen, right? So that's part of the factor. So I think when I look at it, it's more about how many units are going to be coming on. And frankly, when the federal government, most of their discussion isn't necessarily related towards Alberta. A lot of that is focusing on markets like Toronto, like Vancouver.
Yeah, and they're really going to hit those markets, and we're kind of like the lone sheep way back in the thing. But another question, I want to get into more of this, and I don't know if you know a little bit more about this part, Airbnb with rentals.
Yeah.
Because you must put that into your cycle or your mix or your numbers as well. Or no?
We don't, because they're short-term rentals, they are different. And there has been a lot of discussion on short-term rentals as of late. And I do look at it. It's not that I don't. I think my challenge is with this one is there's this idea that putting limitations on short-term rentals should increase supply. Depends on how much short-term rental you have. And in fact, I think there is a difference between somebody who is renting out a vacant home on a short-term rental versus someone who is renting a room in their home. Right? So on a short-term rental, if somebody's renting a room in their home, you're actually adding to the supply. As opposed to, somebody who's doing a short-term versus a long-term rental. So I think there are a lot of challenges right now in the short-term rental. A lot of people don't like them. They don't want them in their neighborhood. They don't want the people coming through. So there's some public pushback on short-term rentals. Of course, the hotel industry is not a big fan of short-term rentals, right? Because, that's competition to a certain extent, right?
And same with the government of BC. It definitely does not want short-term rentals. And that's why I wanted to get more into that question, is that there's areas in BC, obviously with like Kelowna, Penticton, and you look at those guys that they're really trying to get away from short-term rentals and saying, well, if we can make short-term rentals, get rid of this because you have an asset and make it into a long-term rental. Okay, now we stop the labor shortage, the housing crisis. And it forces owners that if you had 2 or 3 houses that it's dropped the value, so now someone can basically purchase that a house at affordable price, give or take. So that's kind of the idea concept that they're thinking on that.
Yeah, and I think I might look at it a little differently. And I understand what they're saying, but fundamentally it depends on how much of the whole market is actually short-term rental. And I think oftentimes when we think about the overall housing stock and all of if it's only 1% of the market, is it really going to be enough that's going to significantly sway activity? And I think sometimes that's what needs to be really assessed is just like foreign ownership. I'm always curious, well, what's the foreign ownership? They've only started really tracking that number. So I think to be impactful, the first thing I'd have to say is, is short-term rental product, is it 1%? Is it 5%? Is it 20% of your market? Because that answer really does differentiate what you might want to do on a policy basis. If it's 1% and you think by making all these changes, you're not necessarily going to have the impact on supply. Now you might make people who don't like short-term renters happy around you. So maybe that is your win as a politician. But I'm more about, how for it to have an impact, it has to be a lot of the market. And I think markets like Toronto have seen short-term rentals rise. I'd also argue some of that is because it's a lot easier for evictions. One of the challenges in some of the markets like Toronto is they do struggle with evictions for longer term tenants. So are they doing it because of other challenges in the market versus, so I think sometimes that has to come into play as well. It's just understanding why are there a rise in short term versus long term rentals.
And I know in BC, when we talk BC about rentals, to get somebody out of a rental property in Kelowna, I'll use that as an example, it's just about impossible. Like you've got to give them 60, 90 days. It's got to be this. And it's meant for the actual renter versus the owner. So it's a very scary concept when you're looking at that part of it.
That's right. And so short-term renters could be actually longer-term renters. But they're in there in the fact that then they have less concerns about if there's a problem that arises and they need to get rid of their tenant. And again, we don't know these sort of details, but again, how much of the market is it? Nobody's really had a clear number for me. I've seen numbers showing maybe it's 1%. I'm like, well, then you're not changing a lot.
So when you're doing these numbers and they're presenting numbers to you, so that's 1%, 2%, how do you verify those numbers? Do you actually have a second source to say, hey, wait a second, I don't know if you're right?
Well, and that's the challenge. So for things like short-term rentals, we can't verify. Like we have to take whoever has done this measurement, and they might say it's a certain percentage, and we might look at total household numbers to see if it's close. But we don't track that. Anything on the resale side, we directly track that information, so I can verify that. So any home that has sold through the MLS system, I know all the details that I can about it. So that stuff can be verified. Oftentimes with other groups, we have to just look to see. So what I'll often do is see, is it consistent? So again, I'm always looking for consistency in data. Even rental data. Rental data is another one that there's a wide range of rental data available out there and all different sources. So I often don't necessarily focus specifically on the number. I look at the trend, especially on rents. Are they trending up? Are they all saying that they're trending up? To what degree? Just because there's so much inconsistency because everyone has a different measure. And again, short-term renters, same thing. Like who's tracking it? Is everybody going through and looking at percentage? And I've seen, and some of them will talk about their methodology. And you have to make some assumptions if it's a reasonable methodology. Did they get enough of the products, and how are they measuring it? And sometimes that's how you verify. You can't, unless somebody's out there actually tracking this on a regular basis, it's really difficult to say exactly what that is.
So who would be tracking on a regular basis?
Well, for short-term renters,
or not necessarily the renters, but anything in general, like the builders, like that's coming from. Where does the builders' information come from?
They don't always share a lot of their information either. So
Right.
So CMHC does track starts data that they get from builders. So
That'd be your permit.
Yeah, well, there's permits. Yeah, so you get permit datas, and then they actually track once as that shovel goes in the ground. All right, so CMHC data, and they've been doing it for years in a consistent methodology, just like they have a rental, even though it's only once a year. They do it in a consistent methodology, so they're ones that we tend to look at. Stats Canada has done some work with regards to tracking things like investor ownership, and they work with various agencies. So I think it depends on the source of the data. Usually they tell you their methodology. Like for the new home builders, they don't necessarily share directly, but you get that information through CMHC.
And how accurate is that information? And I'm not saying builders' names or anything because it really doesn't matter. It's just like, okay, so I'm a business owner. I'm a builder, and I'm looking, okay, I do 800 houses because I need my loans and mortgages or whatever that is. And then,
Right.
But that's actually, I'm only doing 30 houses. So it's that big exchange of discrepancy could be huge. Hey, take a minute and smash that subscribe button, and let's get back to the episode.
It can be for some things, and I think it depends on the measurement. So I'm pretty confident in the starts data. So when they say this is how many starts are, I'm pretty confident that that's how many starts there are in the area that they measure. Back in my history, I worked at CMHC a long time ago, so they actually send people out. And they do so they actually send people out to verify, right? So I feel very confident about that. Whenever it's survey data, then I'm a little bit more questionable. So one thing I have heard with, some of the rental data is that it is survey. So we're relying on the information that's been provided to them. And sometimes it's a little questionable when I hear what property managers are actually telling them versus what. So there can be some of that. So again, I say, okay, strip out some of those variability. And again, what is your purpose of this data? If it is things like rental and it's coming from CMHC, I don't tend to necessarily focus on that rental specific number. I'm looking at the trend, because the nice thing is, even if there's flaws in the survey methodology, they have been tracking this for many, many, many years. And at least you can get a general trend. And I find those trends are consistent with the rest of the data that I'm seeing. So again, when I look at anything that's survey based, I try and see if it's consistent with anything that's more of a hard measure, if it's a survey versus an actual count.
And the hard measure would be
so for me, a start, that's a hard, like this is shovel is in the ground, construction is
exactly.
happening, that's a start. Permits, because not all permits turn into starts, right? So that's why I do like to focus on the starts data a little bit more than permits. Now, permits can give you a really good indication of how much new home activity there will be in the following year. which is great. But again, I want to know how many actually started.
Right. Now, when doing this whole when you get all your numbers together and you got this, because the biggest people that need this information is obviously, and I'm assuming realtors, right?
Yeah, well, and realtors use a lot of resale data. So again, resale data we track. So the difference with resale is every realtor, anytime they sell a home, there is a whole bunch of data they have to put into our database system. So they're going to list the home, they're going to put in, price and, measurements and all that sort of stuff. So we get all sorts of information on every single property. From there, we take that data and then I aggregate it directly. So we go and say, okay, all of these homes have sold, this fits this property type or this category. And then we take it and we aggregate that data. So we're constantly, adjusting and fixing that data as because that's a live database that we use. So that data is, in abundance and our members have access to everything right down to every community. So we have data that goes right down to this is your individual community. This is what's been happening in sales, pricing, listings, inventory. We can tell how many homes are coming in various price ranges. And that information is very useful, obviously, for our members for various reasons. Also, a lot of external groups as well have a certain interest in that sort of data. And that's just on the resale market. If we could have that for the new home, that would be great.
And that's a great question.
Yeah.
How do we do that? And it's kind of like asking ourselves better questions. If we could get that for new homes.
To that detail?
How would that help out the market?
Well, you would at least see what all the new home products are coming in. Like the most we get is whatever we're getting from CMHC. Now, maybe CMHC has more details, but they can't necessarily share them. So again, for me looking at it, there's only so much I can do with it. Now, if all the home builders were to have a database or have a system, I find home builders don't always want to share what that price is, right? So even when home builders list on our system, then they're sharing that price. So I think sometimes because you have to put in a sold price, right? So I think that sometimes that some of those details, it'd be great if all the home builders could get together, track all that information, take out the individual side, because even understanding from the new home side, well, you have sold it at this price. Well, what does that include? Right? We know that there's a sale price, but sometimes it doesn't include your appliances. Like what does that number actually include? So because you can get some stuff out of like once it's actually official and it goes through your land title system, you can get some of that information.
And I'm surprised that they don't share that data because you look at something that is this powerful that if you can monitor it, you can change it. Yet our builders are pretty sophisticated, mind you. And to be able to take that and say, well, we want to grow as a company, as an individual, as society, as humanity, where we're at, we need to put this out there so that we can have better measurements and better everything that we're doing. It kind of...
But there's competition between different builders, right? So
totally.
again, I don't, and again, I don't know. I'm always somebody who like the more data, the better. I'll take anything I can get. So yeah, if there was a system where they were tracking it all and sharing it, and again, I think the issue is in sharing. Mm-hmm. The same way with rentals, property managers aren't always as willing to share that information. So when you think of rents information that comes from maybe rentals.ca, that might be a listing rent. I don't know what the actual rent is. We can make some assumptions that it's similar or less, but we don't know what they actually transacted at because that information is often not shared. So that tends to happen on the new home side as well.
Wow. Well, being chief economist, quick question is all on the same side of it. Have you been using AI at all?
Not yet. I'm just starting to, if I had more time, I would investigate it more to see what the options are. I've heard a lot of talk about what you can and can't do. But I haven't been using it really.
Well, and it's interesting because where you come from, the background that you come from and the numbers and you talk about this, you're that exact, and I'm not saying for AI to do it, but it's all that whole package together is just absolutely wonderful because you look at getting that information and how powerful that is for you.
Right. And apparently the predictive side of things are really good. And again, I think that needs more exploring on my part to understand what type of predictive abilities it can do. I know they're often used for valuation modeling more so than kind of what I do. Right. So when I'm doing forecasting, I am modeling it. I am putting it in an econometric model to figure out what I think might happen. Does AI do it better? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe not. Yeah.
And most applications I've seen on the AI has been on the how to value a specific home. Whereas I'm less concerned about how a specific home is doing. I'm more concerned about how the overall market is doing.
Right. So if you're looking and you had one thing to say about since you started to where you are today, and you could live 1 year or in the past, present, future, which would have been the best time to live in Calgary?
Ooh, I'm a Calgary girl, so I don't know. I've always been in Calgary.
And which would have been the best year?
I think it depends on what. Okay, so that's I don't know. I'm biased towards Calgary. I think I've only lived outside of Calgary a couple of years, so. In fairness, I spent most of my time here and I've done very well in this market. I'm not going to complain. I think if you were buying, I don't know, are you young? Are you older? Like, I don't know. What do you like to do?
Well, let's break it down to get a little bit more curious about it. As a young buyer, because right now, and I have young kids and they say the same thing, oh, it's so expensive. And you know what? We go back to when we were younger. Yet, you know what? I actually went to school up the hill, both ways, back and forth. And then my parents before that said the same thing. Yeah. So here we are now, and they're going, oh, houses are so expensive. Here it is. But I believe right now where we're living, we're in, especially Calgary, we're in the greatest city where everything's coming together. Sure, the houses are priced, and I say, sure, the house price is this, but it is what it is.
Well,
hey, take a minute and smash that subscribe button, and let's get back to the episode.
And people, anytime people talk about what house prices were, I remind people, what was your salary back then? Everyone loves to talk about back in the day, it was this price. Like I always see quotes from like the 60s. I'm like, but you didn't earn as much. So like you have to inflation adjust that, but park that aside. So if you think about these young people who are talking about that, and I get it. They're saying it's really expensive. But are you going to become a city? You have to remember our city's still growing. We're a city. We're not the 4 million person city. We're still on a smaller city size. I would say we are relatively affordable. Like, yes, it is a change of mindset because we are a traditionally detached homes, right? Go to a lot of major other centers. They're not mostly detached homes. They're mostly actually more apartment style condos. Because they have that density. So sometimes I think that there is also that perspective, especially with newer people coming in going, well, it's so unaffordable, but they're thinking about it in a detached home perspective. And even at 700,000, it's not as bad as some cities, and we earn more here. Like our incomes are generally higher in Alberta than they are in Toronto or, BC. And I think that you always need to keep that perspective. So I think that, anyone who's in this market, they talk about many years ago, well, there was challenges then too, right? I remember when we bought our first home, people thought we were crazy. Crazy, you're spending $300,000 on a home. They're like, who does that? Right? And I'm like, well, we did. and it was fine. It worked out just fine. And I think that the challenge is with anybody who is active in the market, it's what is your goal? What's people often confuse your personal residence versus an investment. So yes, housing is absolutely can be an investment. It can create wealth, no question. How long do you plan on living in this home though? Or is it a home you're living in? And I find everybody can justify their own value for whatever they want as their personal preference. But if it's a home that you're living in, how long do you plan on living in it for? This is what really should be shaping some of these decisions. Are you have a 5-year window? Do you have a 10-year window? You planning on buying something and then renting it? Because they're different things. And they're different reasons to get into a market. So if you're buying it as your personal home, what's your plan? Like, is it 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? And that should shape some of those decisions. And I think that there's opportunity in all price ranges. And people forget that we have some of those communities outside of Calgary that still have some relatively affordable homes.
And those communities outside of Calgary are awesome. And that's why we live in the greatest province in the world and where we're at, where we're at. So I wanted to know a little bit more about what is migration?
So migration, okay, so it can be broken out into several parts. The first thing to consider is there's international migrants and there's interprovincial. International are people coming from other countries. That is has a very different impact on the housing market versus interprovincial, so coming from other parts of the province. International, no question, Calgary has seen a big boost in international migration. Part of that is international policy or national policy that says we're going to be bringing in more immigrants. So we're seeing some of that impact, bringing in more refugees. But those people tend to start in rental. They take a lot longer before they move into ownership. In fact, they've got some restrictions on ownership, like foreign people until at least another year can't buy directly until you have citizenship. So there are factors that really limit when they can buy. So they're starting off in the rental market. Now they are contributing. That's why, in part, why we've seen rental markets tighten as much as they have is because of all the international migration. Now, when we think about the other side of it, interprovincial, this is really a key thing when we think about how it impacts housing demand today, right? So Alberta has seen not quite record, but really, really strong levels of interprovincial migration. We haven't seen any interprovincial migration like this since that 2006 period, 2007. People and most of the people that have been coming here have been coming from Ontario and BC. Why that matters is because they're turning into homeowners a lot sooner. And it's also shaped the market today. So if you're coming from Ontario, where prices are much higher, you're a lot less sensitive to the higher interest rate environment. And again, you're looking at Alberta, you're looking at Calgary going, well, that's not expensive for a detached home. They're like, that's reasonable. So what has been unique in Calgary is that when we look at the upper price ranges, and I'm thinking 700,000 plus, typically high interest rate environment, that market starts to slow. Well, we haven't seen that here. We've seen really strong sales even in the upper price ranges. And a lot of that is because people are coming from Ontario, from BC, from higher price markets, and they are viewing us as affordable, and they're still purchasing. And that's what's kept demand so strong here versus other parts of the country. Like Saskatchewan is another example. Saskatchewan, they've had international migration. They haven't had interprovincial. People have still left Saskatchewan. So more than coming in, right? And they haven't seen the same boost in their housing market. So again, when you think about flows, and especially short-term flows that drive like periods of shorter, less supply or more, that's a key part of it. So when I see those interprovincial numbers be as strong as they are, what has it done? Well, it's caused our resale supply to come down, right? Because they're going after the product that's available, which is on the resale. That's ready to move in today. Right. So they're picking up that product. Supply levels have come down. So they impact not just demand, they impact supply. And it's really contributed to some of what we've been have happening in terms of some of the low supply levels.
Awesome. Well, you know what? The things we know that we don't know. Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And welcome to Shed Talk.
Thanks.
Now you know. Shed Talk.